Hello, it's Lion here with HobbiesofaMan once again, and today we're going to be doing another Blue Lock arc review. Today we're going to be looking at the third arc, which is called the Second Selection arc, and it's chapters 39 through 90. Now, if you look at the Blue Lock wiki online, it's going to not say that. It's going to have this weird split where a few of the chapters between 85 and 90 are going to be counted for the world's best arc or something like that. It's a little five chapter mini arc that doesn't actually make sense to me, because the problem is that the story in the last couple chapters interweaves three different storylines, right? Or two different storylines. It interweaves the end of the second selection, the beginning of the next challenge for the winners of the second selection, and then it goes back to see some other characters during their second selection arc. And so it interweaves these things. And so it causes the storylines to be split unevenly. And so the wiki decided to change the what chapters went with what arc, and ignoring the chronological order, right? So I decided to not do that. So I'm going to look at the second selection arc as being everything from 39 to 90. And then the next arc starts 91 onwards, right? So it is what it is. Also, I do have to say that I did read 2 or 3 of these chapters on Manga decks because they were from volume 11, and I don't currently have that. So, I did do a little bit of a naughty thing there, but it was mostly just so I could actually make the review for this whole thing. And since it was only 2 chapters, I didn't really feel bad about it. So, yeah. The author for Blue Lock is Minayuki Kaneshiro. The art here is done by Yusuke Nomura. The publisher is Kodansha. The demographic is shonen, and the genres here are sports and death game / thriller / whatever else you might want to call it. Does have an adaptation that's about to end, I think. Season 1's about to end. And the rating for this is a 5 out of 5. I thought it was awesome. It was really, really good. So the premise for this part of the story is basically that the first selection has ended. The teams that were made for that selection are dissolved. So Isagi and Kunigami and Chigiri and all of them are no longer teammates, right? What happens now is that they all have to go through a different set of challenges. There's 5 stages to this challenge. And the initial stage is actually an individual battle, right? They have to battle this system, basically. And then it develops into a team of 3, then a team of 4, and then a team of 5, based on wins and losses, where the winning team of a particular match gets to take one player from the others. And so this is to create a team of 5 players that all have this chemical reaction, which is the phrase that they like to use a lot, to battle a group of 5 international players that are revealed, in those chapters that I mentioned earlier that were kind of scrambled around to fit into this arc narrative. On the Blue Lock wiki. So, that's basically the premise there. So let's get into the plot line. Let's look at it, a little bit more kind of in detail, right? So the first selection ends. They have 10 days of wild, crazy strength training. Basically, it's more like stamina building training than it really is strength training. But, either way, basically they just have to train for 10 days like crazy. And then they move on, and they end up all in this area. And apparently, it turns out that there was no higher levels. Every team that was there, every person that was there was kind of what's the word they were misled and thought that they were all at the bottom of the heap when they were actually all about evenly matched. This basically created a hunger for a desire to win, right? This hunger to prevail in every person that was in this competition, which was the point, right? So basically, Ego pulled an Aizawa here and did a logical ruse kind of thing on all of these kids so that they would all think that they were weak and that they had to get strong. So that's pretty cool. It's pretty interesting. I actually really enjoyed that kind of twist there. And then the second selection starts. And so it's 5 stages. The first stage is this kind of one-on-one kind of system where the character has to score 100 goals in 90 minutes. And they're fighting against this digital creation called the Blue Lock Man, which is a goalie, which is cool, but honestly, it makes me a bit upset that it got introduced this late, because Ayamon, or whatever his name is, the guy that was the goalie, was supposed to be a striker, but he didn't really get to play as a striker for however long the Blue Lock system was going on for, which kind of sucks for him. And so if they had this technology, maybe it would have been good for them to have it for every character, right? Or for every stage of this story, so that Ayamon could have been a member. But maybe that was to kind of have a bigger impact here, or it was an idea that Minayuki Kaneshiro didn't come up with until later. I'm not really sure, but it does kind of throw a bit of a wrench in the earlier parts of the story once you know about it, right? So yeah, anyway, we follow Isagi, who has to do this, and he actually manages to pass quite well, which is great. But he actually doesn't happen to be anyone in the top 3. He's a little bit lower. I think he's like 14 or 15. And he passes about the same time as Bachira. So they join forces, they team up, and then they need a new team member. So what happens is they're looking around. They're actually trying to wait for Kunigami or Chigiri, because they're basically the people that were friends in Team Z, right? So they're waiting for them, and then they're gonna have to pick one of them, because they can only be teams of 3. But while that happens, Nagi actually wants Isagi to join up with him. Nagi is the prodigy kid that didn't really enjoy playing soccer, that was just being kind of controlled by Rio at the end of the first election. And he wants to join with Isagi, but Isagi's like, no, I'm with Bachira. I can only take one person into my team. Otherwise, I'd be happy to join you, right? So Nagi actually does something unprecedented here, and he decides to join Isagi instead of staying with Rio. This upsets Rio a lot, because of course it would. Rio basically was banking on Nagi being with him forever, and being his friend and like close confidant, so that he could get what he wanted. But Nagi finally decides to do something for himself, and this affects Rio negatively, but it also makes Isagi and Bachira kind of excited, right? Because now they have this like very strong player. And Isagi is basically like a playmaker type character. So Nagi's kind of style kind of fits with Isagi very well, right? So that's really cool there. So they join them, and they actually go up against the big 3, or the top 3, or whatever you want to call them, which are, let me see if I wrote them down here. Rin, Jubei, and Tokimitsu. And Rin is this kind of cool, collected, badass type character like Todoroki or Sasuke. Jubei is this kind of like ridiculous character. I guess he'd be something like Rock Lee, if you wanted to use like a Naruto analogy, but he's just eccentric in a very weird way. And then Tokimitsu is actually someone that's very powerful, but has kind of like self-confidence issues, which is really interesting, because this makes it so that this team doesn't really have cohesion, but they just have so much raw ability that they can manage to fight well against Isagi, Bachira, and Nagi. So they do this, and they actually lose. And so what happens is that Bachira gets taken by Ren's team, and Ren takes Bachira, and Isagi is upset, because obviously, and he makes a promise to Bachira about him fighting back and kind of eventually getting him back onto his team, which of course is a relevant plot point later on, right? So they drop a stage, and they actually end up having to battle against Baro, who ended up teaming up with Narahaya. And if I remember correctly, that was the guy that was always eating everyone's food in Team Z, right? And it turns out that basically Narahaya has this kind of like poor background. Like his family is very large, but also they don't really have that much money going for them. And so Narahaya thought that playing soccer would be the way for him to bring his family out of, this poverty. But the problem is that he wasn't able to develop his skills and power well enough compared to everyone else. And so actually Isagi manages to beat him by doing just that. So they're playing the game, and Baro is basically winning because Baro is significantly better than Isagi, because he has that special, 27-meter range kick or whatever. And Nagi and Isagi haven't really figured out how to connect with each other yet. So they're doing that, and then there's a moment where Narahaya actually tries to do something. He tries to copy Isagi's skill, his his point blank kick. I think it's what it was, like the fact that Isagi can kick directly in front of him very well, right? But he fails. He doesn't do it, right? So Isagi gets this idea to do the same thing back, and so he copies Narahaya's ability to weave behind people's blind spots, and he manages to beat Baro and Narahaya. And so he takes Baro, and Narahaya, of course, has to leave Blue Lock. And, that's it for him, which kind of sucks because you get the backstory right after, and so you kind of feel bad for him, in retrospect. But, it is what it is. It just kind of happens like that. So basically, Isagi learns how to devour other people's skills, which is really interesting. And then, of course, Baro doesn't really work well with Isagi and Nagi, which is kind of difficult to deal with, right? So they move on to the next stage, and they're actually against Chigiri and Kunigami and Ryo, who are basically all upset that they got left behind by their friends. And so now that they're battling each other, it's kind of like a revenge thing, but also like a lot of respect for each other, at least from Isagi, Chigiri, and Kunigami, right? And so they're having trouble because Isagi can't really control Baro. But eventually everyone just decides to ignore him and not play with him. And so there's this kind of moment where Isagi gets this kind of like crazy, awesome, like conquerors hockey type thing. And he just like oppresses Baro's ego or something. It's really edgy and ridiculous, but it's really fun. So this happens, and it's when Baro is like, "Oh, I wasn't the king of this game," which is a funny like meme that's been going around because there was a unofficially translated version that just was bad. It was like, "I wasn't the king" or something like that. I don't know. It's a good meme somewhere out in the internet. So this happens, and actually Baro manages to evolve because he learns how to do this new type of like dribbling charge that he couldn't do before, in a way to try to defeat Isagi and Nagi and the fact that they're ignoring him. So he develops this new skill, he manages to score, and that wins the match for Isagi's team. And so that's awesome, that's very good. They end up having to take Chigiri because they want a speedy character on their team, right? So, yeah. Then Rin and Bachira are practicing, and Bachira gets a lot of backstory here, and it's actually really interesting. His mom was an artist, and Bachira was like friends with the ball, kind of like a Captain Tsubasa type thing, but he didn't really have any friends that wanted to play soccer with him, so he came up with this imaginary friend, this monster, which is a kind of a manifestation of how he wants to play soccer, that no one can really match until he met Isagi. And then stuff kind of spirals there because it turns out that Rin decides that Bachira is actually just hiding behind this idea instead of actually trying to develop and create his own skills in order to play that way even without someone else. And it's really interesting. It's a very kind of cool moment for Rin and Bachira. And so the whole time that they're having their match against Isagi's team, is really, really interesting because Bachira is kind of going through all of this thought process, and he's lamenting the fact that Isagi finally was someone that played like that monster inside him, but that he has to crush him right now because he wants to win, right? So Isagi actually manages to evolve a lot. He manages to get as good as Rin at like understanding the field, because Rin is basically a better version of Isagi for most of this arc. And then, so Isagi evolves, he manages to outpredict Rin, but the problem is that Rin still manages to score because he managed to play into luck, right? And so Isagi's team loses, and Isagi is taken from everyone else, which is really, really interesting, right? And then they get an explanation of luck. They move on to the next stage. We learn about the new players that are introduced, the 5 international players. I think they were like Brazilian, Argentinian, Spanish. I think there was a German dude and some other character. Basically, like the top 5. The 5 countries that have the top ranking in FIFA. That's basically what they were represented by some teenagers. They're all made up, which is cool. And so that happens, and then we get back to Rio and Kunigami, and we get a little bit of their story going on, and then that's where the chapter ends. Where the arc ends at chapter 90. So the 2 or 3 chapters where the next stage is explained is what is told to you on the Blue Lock Wiki. That is a part of a different arc. Sorry, I worded that really badly. Let me try that again. So there's like 2 chapters at the end of the story. At the end of this arc, like chapters 84 and 85 or something like that, that are explaining the next selection, right? The 3rd arc where they battle against, or the 4th arc where they battle against these international players. The Blue Lock Wiki, I am harping on this because I don't like it, moves those chapters onto another arc. So it's kind of confusing, right? But, it doesn't really matter. Just read it in order. Who cares, right? So, yeah. And that's basically the end of this arc, right? So, yeah, characters-wise, we have Naruhaya's backstory. We get Bachira's backstory. We get Baro's backstory as well, which is pretty cool. We get introduced to Rin, Jubei, Tokimitsu, and a few other characters, actually, if I remember correctly. We get introduced to the 5 international players. And then we development for Isagi, for Nagi, for Baro, and for Bachira. And we don't really get any developments for any of the other characters. They don't evolve or develop their skills or anything like that. And in terms of world building, we don't really get much besides the Blue Lock Man and an explanation for what luck is. So there you go. Art-wise, it's super badass. It's really great. There is a little bit of fan service here. And I wouldn't really say it's fan service because it's just kind of like a pinup. But it depends on how raunchy something has to be before you think it's fan service, right? So yeah, the chapter 39 cover page is a really sexy pinup thing of Enri-chan, or whatever her name is, like the manager for the Japanese soccer division or whatever. And it looks really good. So yeah, ratings wise, this is a 5 out of 5. It was amazing. It was so cool, and I really like Blue Lock. Now, it's really cringy and ridiculous and kind of edgy for the sake of being edgy. But I think it handles itself really well, and it's really fun and really interesting. And the edgy kind of chuny kind of things help develop that element of coolness. So I like it, which is kind of odd because I don't really enjoy overly edgy type things most of the time, which is why I don't really like Chainsaw Man all that much. But for whatever reason, it works for me for Blue Lock, and I quite like it. So there you go. That's really all I have to say for this arc. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe, and comment down below. Let me know your thought. And thank you guys very much for watching. See you guys later.